Hello and welcome to what I consider to be one of the most important shows that we've been doing for several years now and will continue to do so in the future. What's going to happen in 2023? What's going to happen in this year ahead, and what are Ruchir's forecasts for that? And remember, 97% right in 2022 last year, and now 100% right. Okay, the first thing, Ruchir, that you're forecasting is there's going to be a long grind. By long grind, you mean there's going to be no bust and no boom. It's not going to be a dramatic recession. You're saying there's shorter recessions now because of easy money, higher government spending and low interest rates. And if you look at the shorter recessions, according to Ruchir, in pre-World War II, the percentage of time that there were recessions was 44%, nearly half the time the economy was in a recession. Then from World War II till 1979, almost 20%, 18% of the time was in recession. That's high. Now, because of this easy money era, it's down to half that and 1/4 what it was. This is a huge change.
Yeah, I think that this has a lot to do with the role of government stimulus, government intervention, that in the pre-war era, there was very little of government intervention in economies such as the United States or the developed economies of that era.
Right.
And it's really since then that you've seen much more government intervention, and especially in the last 3-4 decades, as inflation was declining, every time there was the slightest trouble, because inflation was low and falling, the governments and central banks were able to come out there and put out a lot of stimulus. And that was particularly true in the pandemic, that we saw stimulus like never before during the pandemic.
Finally, I just wanted to look at your data on this long grind and what are the implications for India. And they're quite important, very, very serious actually. Because as the world slows, so will India slow down. Because historically, India's growth rate, according to all Ruchir and his team's data, India has been only slightly above the world in terms of growth rate. So if the world slows down, India's growth rate is unlikely to be above 5%. Now, the dollar has been rising compared to all other currencies, but you're saying you're seeing the peak of the dollar. If we look at Ruchir's data, this is what it looks like. Every time the dollar rises, it's followed by a downturn. Look at those three, and you're now hitting 11 years, which is much longer than peaks that dollar has taken to reach. 11 years is taken, so you're saying we're going to have a downturn now of the dollar, which means rupee will strengthen in comparison, or all other currencies.
Yeah, I think that, in terms of the rupee has weakened significantly against the dollar over the last 75 years, as we last spoke about.
Yes.
But the rupee's depreciation against the dollar has been particularly sharp over the last couple of years.
Yes.
And I think that that's likely to slow down.
Now, the next forecast you say that when America goes down, which it will, the rest of the world will rise. And the data from that is actually also fascinating. This America down, the rest of the world rises. First of all, America down and the rest of the world up because US stock market values are disproportionately high. I never realized that. It's got 4% of the population and is punching well above its weight. It's got 4% of the population and 60% of the market cap. That is just out of whack. And 25% of GDP, and still, that's the economy, and still 60% of the stock market capitalization.
Yeah, America's always had the most dominant, best performing stock market in the world over a very long term, right? If you look at the last 100 years or so, America has been top of the charts. It really has a true capitalist system that way. But what's happened in the last decade is extraordinary, which is that the American stock market has done so well, has outperformed all of the global stock markets by such a massive amount that we have the situation today where even though America is only 25% of the global economy, and that share has remained stable for a while now, America's share of global stock market values is 60%, and that's never happened before.
And the other point you make in your next forecast is that tech stocks are going to shrink. And if you look at that, that's what's happened after decades in which big tech firms dominate, they shrink in the next decade. That's historically, these are top 10 firms by market capitalization. If You're in the top 10 in one decade. There's a high probability you will not be in the top 10 in the next decade. Just 10 years and it can transform everything.
Yeah, so I think that this is very telling, that this is by market value, the top 10 firms in the world at the beginning of every decade. And as you can see, that 8 or 9 of them change.
The tech slowdown will hit India as well. In fact, it already has hit it. In 2021, 35% of all capital raised through IPOs were tech. 2022, that became 2%, and that you think that pattern is going to continue?
Yeah, I think that this was a climax we had in 2021. So in many ways, for people who have lived through this, there are shades of this of what happened in 2001 or so,
right.
Which you got a big tech boom,
yeah.
And then you had a bit of a bust. And even though technology is here to stay, to be there for a long period of time, but it will take a while now for this recovery to happen, for people to digest this mini bust that's happening now.
And I did want to censor this next forecast of yours, because you're saying more money for TV doesn't mean better TV. Less money means better TV. Just have a look at this data and don't take this seriously. TV needs money. In fact, less money has meant better TV. Money spent on TV content has surged from 2018 to, in 4 years, from 89 billion to 142 billion, but the content has not done well. Just look at his data on content. Look at that. This is ratings of content and shows. It's just a downward slide. And the next point you make is that after decades of being a big worry in the world, Japan, with high debt and all that, Japan is back.
Like you will recall that in the late 1980s, Japan was the shining star.
Right.
It was, in fact, 16% of the global economy. It was 45% of global stock market value. That was Japan. It was, and then because of the bust that happened and the way it was handled, but also driven by its poor demographics, with the population shrinking, with debt levels so high, and other issues, the Japanese economy and the Japanese market have done very poorly over the last 3 decades. My point is that now quietly Japan may be making a comeback, because a lot of the problems that Japan has, the rest of the world also has, in terms of the debt levels have gone up, the demographics in the rest of the world. We're seeing more than 60 countries today have their working age population that is shrinking. That number, when Japan first went bust in 1990, was barely 20 countries had a shrinking working age population. So the rest of the world is, in a way, converging with Japanese
catching
standards.
Up with Japan, and Japan is going ahead. Your next point is about people are outsourcing, no longer to China, outsourcing outside China. And that could be a big opportunity for countries in Asia, etc. If you look at outsourcing to China from America, China loses share of US imports. It's gone down by about 4%. And the rest of Asia has gained. India has only made a small gain. So China, outsourcing to China has gone down 4%. Other countries, excluding China in Asia, have gone up 4%. India so far, the outsourcing has only gone up 0.2%. Your next point is that there's going to be a return to orthodoxy. And what do you mean by that? Just look at this. 10 developing countries with biggest twin deficits. You mean fiscal plus external account deficit. And India's in the top 10 of the world in terms of, so this is a worry. And now orthodoxy means change that.
Yeah, no, in terms of, the point I'm making here is this, which is that because the era of easy money is over, interest rates have gone higher everywhere, and financing in general has become much more difficult. In this environment, the scope for policymakers to do something too experimental, something away from what is defined as economic orthodoxy, which is that you need to follow a tight fiscal policy, you need to have relatively high interest rates. If you try to do something different, the market's going to come and punish you.
This again is a section I would like to censor. You're saying you're going to have a relief from elections. We love elections. Why do you want a relief from it? What do you mean by this? Let's have a look at what your data says. 2023 unusually will be a light year for elections around the world. That's just before the election storm in 2024. 2023, no country has elections this year. This has not happened this century.
Among the G7 countries.
Among the advanced,
Among the
ones that have a huge
the 7
impact.
largest democracies, there's not a single country having elections in 2023, and that's not ever happened this century. So it's quite a coincidence that that's happened.
And you're saying on G20, the lowest number, only 2 elections this year, the lowest number in 35 years?
Yes, that's right.
And that you're saying, but there are 2 elections and spotlight will be on possible regime change in Turkey and Nigeria. Are you, is it based on opinion polls? You've done a forecast?
No, I think
but that's what people are talking about.
Yeah, that's what people are talking about, which is the fact that among the G20 economies also, which include some emerging markets, there are hardly any elections this year. So very rarely does something be newsworthy for something not happening. And the fact that we have a bit of a pause in 2023 is very unusual as far as the global electoral cycle goes. But a couple of countries which are having elections, not that big but still significant, are Turkey and Nigeria.
Yeah, they are.
And in both those places, if I can dare say so, that if you get a regime change, that could end up being good for those countries, because in Turkey's case we have seen that Erdogan, who started off strong, has really run his economy into the ground.
When the things are going well, people look for black swans. We've known about that. But now bluebirds we should look out for. And the gloom that's being forecast that you highlight here is that not since surveys began have forecasters thought that a recession is going to come more likely than it is now. The probability of a recession is the highest it's been for 50 years. That forecasters are now, of course, economists are invariably wrong, especially Bengali forecasters, but we do forecast at least, and we are wrong. But now a large, almost 50, over 40% are saying there will be a recession.
Yeah, so the context here is this. One, as you point out, that in the history of surveys, economists have never forecast a recession. So if a recession does happen in 2023, it'll be the first time in history of surveys that economists actually called a recession.